What is up, my friends? Today we are going to be talking about granular synthesis. If you've never heard about granular synthesis, don't worry about it. I just learned about it myself last week. Before we go any further into this video, let me show you the beat that we'll be deconstructing in this video, so that way you know if it's worth it or not to stick around for this video. Alright, so hopefully that beat captured your attention and you're here to hang out for a little bit. I want to talk about some of the lessons that I've learned this last week using this technique. First things first though, I gotta shout out to my boy Kenny Beats and Monte Booker for talking about this in the first place.
Crazy. How do you get those like random melody things? Like that's been, yeah, like, isn't that some OP1 shit?
No, that one not OP1. You can do it on OP1. It's basically a granulizer.
Now, thankfully, Kenny asked that question. Kenny said, how do you do those little random melodies? For me, for a while, I've known that there was a technique out there, but honestly, I just never did enough digging to figure out what it was. It's granular synthesis. Granular synthesis, as I'm learning, allows you to time warp and, you know, stretch and play with pitch of a sample that you have. So today we're gonna dive on in. I'm gonna be using the Granulator II Max for Live plugin. Max for Live is a free resource of additional audio effects or plugins that comes with a bot purchase of Ableton. We're gonna go inside, we're gonna use that. I'm gonna show you the sample that I used. I'm gonna show you how I manipulated it to make those sounds. And we're gonna talk about, you know, some of the lessons that I've learned while using this technique. All right, so before we dive on into the Granulator 2 plugin itself, let's take a look at the sample that I used for the whole track. Now, beautiful piece of music that my good friend Cappy played out. That's using his Prophet 6 synth that he's kind enough to let me hold on to right now. Not only did we just use the synth there, but we also used the Tascam recorder to sample the grand piano that we have here at the house. It's a beautiful combination of the tones there, and that's what I used as the main sample. So when we open up the Granular 2 plugin itself, it kind of looks like a simpler or a sampler if you've ever used either of those two instruments before inside of Ableton. We see a section that we can bring in the sample itself, and then we also see all of these different individual controls that we can have with it. Now, being that this is the first time that I've used this plugin before, I only know a couple of the in and outs of this, but I'm going to show you everything that I know, and what I know was enough to make something cool. So I'm really happy with how this beat turned out. But let's dive on into the plugin itself. So first things first, we're going to talk about these three controls right here. We're going to be talking about the grain, we're going to be talking about the file position, and the spray. So what granular synthesis is doing, it's manipulating the pitch and the different voices that we trigger inside of this synth with delays, with time, and it's allowing us to have these really cool creations that we can come up with. So first things first, if I play one of the notes here on this is a MIDI track, so you can use your keyboard to control this or any controller that you may have. We're gonna hear the first sound that we hear in this track, right? So we can tell that it's a solid note, but there's all these different iterations of it starting and stopping at delayed times. So we hear that really cool glitchy texture that's happening. And that's being done with, again, these three different controls. So first things first, file position. File positioning is going to allow us to drag this sample across, or to drag the selection across the sample. So first thing I did was I moved that file position knob around. I kept pressing keys on my computer. I was literally just laying on my bed with my headphones on, trying to find something cool with this sample. So I would drag the file position around. The next thing that we would look at is the grain. So the grain is actually gonna change how long the sample or how long the selection of that sample that we're using, right? So now if I hold out a note, going to see that it's going to play longer. And it's really cool that we have this little visual feel to see what is actually going on here. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to hit undo real quick like that to go back to where I have it for the track. The last thing that we're going to take a look at is spray. So spray is a time that we're going to be able to control, and what we're actually controlling here with the spray is the amount of voices that are being triggered, right? So when we're talking about voices with synthesizers, the synthesizer itself, right, this plugin itself has all of these different voices that are singing out this note that we're playing. Right now I'm using 8. You can use up to 32. 8 is the default. What spray is doing, it is offsetting the start time of the sample, right? So all these runners are going out to run, but every one of them are starting 79 milliseconds after the other, right? So if I were to extend this, make it longer, we'll see this visually and we'll be able to hear it as well. Right? It's like they're all lagging a little bit behind each other. They're all starting a little bit after the other. If I bring this all the way down, it's going to sound like a synth in general. It's going to sound like a saw wave or something that's starting on time as the other. By delaying this, we get that really cool texture that we use here. So that was the first sound that I used the Granulator II plugin for. The second one that I used it for was this sound that you hear prominently in the drop. So I'm going to play that real quick. So this really staccato, little punchy lead melody that I have here, it was again done in the same exact manner. I brought up the Granulator II plugin. I brought in the same exact sample. I moved that file position along to a little bit later in the sample. I brought the grain up a little bit longer, so that selection size was a little bit longer, and then the spray is brought down a little bit, so those voices are being triggered a little bit closer. Again, I love how visual this plugin is, being able to see that whole sample, being able to see those little start and stop points of all those voices, super cool. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about that was a lesson to myself, it actually comes from this tweet that I saw the other day, which pretty much summed everything up about this whole session in general, is try to be creative and you might not have fun, but if you try to have fun, you'll definitely be creative. And I think this was so perfectly said. For me, when I started off this beat, I was, again, just laying down on my bed with my headphones on, hoping that I would come up with something cool. Luckily, something did come out of it, right? But using a plugin for the first time, no matter what it is, whether it's a stock plugin, whether it's something new that you just bought or you just downloaded, can be intimidating at first. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew something cool could come out of it if I just tried having fun. So that's what I did. That's what I would recommend to anyone that is trying something new for the first time. Very useful for this. So that's how I start off this track. I have the first quote unquote pad here. Then I also have the melody. Now for the melody, why I say try to have fun, right? The glitchy melody that I have that plays in the lead, it's really random and it's really glitchy. And what I did was I found the specific, sound, the texture that I wanted to use out of that granulator. And then I just sat and I drew out that whole loop in the piano roll until I got it right. So I would start and stop until I got it right. Now, that's the whole basis for the granular synthesis that I use in this project. Now, let's just break down the drop in and of itself. Now, this is kind of inspired by Flume. I've always wanted to make something like that guy, even though this isn't necessarily close to that yet. It's a darn good start, right? So I did watch another fella's YouTube video the other day of granular synthesis and trying to make a Flume type beat, which was also inspiration for this. So if you want to go and check out that video down below, I would definitely recommend that. It's in FL Studio, but it was super useful, especially for the layout of this track. So what I tried to do was I made this 4-bar section, right? In the 4-bar section itself, the percussion switches from the first 2 bars to the second 2 bars. Let's listen to it in general, and then I'm going to break down all of the different stacking that I did here to make it sound like it does. Now, this might honestly be the most I've ever stacked percussion inside of a drop, and it was super rewarding to go through all of this. For all of this, I just simply worked with audio. My friend Cappy, again, shout out Cappy. I owe a lot of my creative ability to that guy. He really forced me, when I saw him work in Ableton, to work in arrangement view by dragging audio. Right, so he uses Pro Tools a lot. He uses Ableton for his production. But instead of just using a MIDI controller, getting really comfortable with working with samples in general. So that's what I did. And we see a lot of different stacks here. So I'm pretty sure I worked top down with this. I brought in my snares. Not only did I just bring in the snares, though, I started stacking them. And it was one of the things that I learned a lot from him. We're not stacking just for stacking's sake. Right? We're not just trying to make some loud sound. What we're doing is we're trying to individually bring in pieces that work well together. So I have this snare, for example. Gotta solo the right one though. And then I have this clap layered on it as the same time. So if I was to play both of those together, they work well together. I also adjusted the volumes here so they would work well together. I'm also using a lot of different sounds that I haven't used before. I'm bringing cymbals in at the beginning of every 4 bars that are again layered. One of them has a little bit of a reverb to it, which I feel like introduces the whole 4-bar section really well. I'm also using a lot of organic sounds. So these are organic, meaning things that you create on your own. So there's a dishwasher sample pack that I apparently downloaded at some point, which is bringing me little sounds like that. I don't know what that is. It's moving something around. I also have this little chop right here that I really enjoy, which, I don't know if that was, putting away forks in the dishwasher or something, but that's what it kind of sounds like to me. So I'm bringing all of this together with these unique percussive hits in the first 2 bars. In the first 2 bars, we're having a lot of, stacking of the snares. I'm also bringing in these rim shots. The cymbals are coming in at the beginning, and that's leaving an open space, and it's also bringing those 808s in, right? So the 808s, same thing. 808s are one of my favorite parts of songs in general. The bass end, the low end of a song is one of my favorite things, but it's also not the most easy thing for me to do. And I think that's the next little tip that I would have. It's trusting your ear. For me, I brought in this 808 that I liked. By looking at this sample, I see that it's an F sharp. So I knew that it wasn't going to be in key. And all I simply did was I brought in that 808 that sounded good. And then I just manipulated and transposed the sample until I found the right pitch. Now, the only other thing that is different from the first 2 bars to the second 2 bars of this 4-bar pattern that I use as my drop is the hi-hats that are coming in at the second 2. Now, again, that's something that I've never done before. Shout out again to that video that I watched about the Flume type drop. It really inspired me to have the different types of patterns within the pattern. Last things last here, is again the persistence about making this track. This was made over 3 days. The first day I was simply just laying down in my bed trying to make something cool with the granulizer. The second day I had sent it to one of my good friends, Nate. Nate is like, dude, we got a link. This is a great track. We get together and I get inspired to lay down even more percussion, even more stacks, right? So I brought out the good old OP1, the trusty OP1, and I brought in these 4 little clips at the bottom just to spice up their percussion. Again, not trying to be overbearing with the percussion, but just find things that carry the track along well. The last day, the third and final day, I spent times doing little fills. And it's funny, I actually woke up, I'm going to say like in the middle of the night, and I was like, it needs a drum fill. It needs a drum fill. That's one thing that's missing. So a little bit later in the drop, we will hear. And that took a couple of times messing around with too. I typically don't make tracks like this, and I think that that's why it was so exciting for me in the first place. Was it took me a little bit out of my comfort zone. So a lot of fun with this, a lot of, inspiration coming from using a plugin I've never used before. This whole track, the whole, arrangement of this, it's the same thing repeated over and over for, 2 sections. I have the pad come back in, I have that lead teased again, and then I have the drop. Then we slow things down and we switch back over to the original sample. Which, again, I thought was a really cool way to tie this all in together. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. I had a lot of fun making this beat. I had a lot of fun tinkering with the Granulator II plugin. It was really encouraging, again, to work with something I've never worked with, to just sit and tinker with it for tinkering's sake, if that's a phrase people use. I had a lot of fun messing around and inspiring myself throughout the process. There's a lot of times where I sit down and I don't make anything that I like. So it was really cool to make something I'm proud of. I've listened to this several times. I've sent it to friends who have given me good feedback. So I hope you all enjoyed this little video. I hope you liked the in-depth look to how I used the plugin and to furthermore how I made this track off of it. If you want any of those resources, again, I'm gonna leave them down below if you wanna watch that full video of Monte Booker and Kenny Beats. Super informative. Kenny Beats, shout out to you, man, for dropping all that knowledge on us. Secondly, I'm also gonna leave the link to the video to the YouTuber who kind of inspired this type of beat for his Flume tutorial that he had. Very informative video. It is in FL Studio, but being able to watch it, still the structure of it really inspired this beat in and of itself. Lastly, if you want to listen to this track, the full track, I'm going to put it on my SoundCloud so you guys can check that out. Hopefully it will be a full song one day. I have a couple people in mind that might work on this. But yeah, if you see anything that you want me to try to work on, let me know. I'll make a video about it. I'm going to be using this Granular plugin for a while. I'm going to learn a little bit more of it. So if you want to see a full in-depth video of all of the different sections inside of it, let me know and I'll bring that to you. I hope you guys have a good day. I hope you all are doing good. Take care of yourselves and I'll see you soon.